It's about to be 2022, and we finally have our first solo piece of Boba Fett canon Star Wars content. It's not a movie, but the TV show will do. What's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be giving you my spoiler review of the Book of Boba Fett Episode 1, the latest Star Wars show that just hit Disney+. It's obviously a spin-off of The Mandalorian, as in The Mandalorian Season 2, we see a post-credit scene where Boba Fett becomes the new head of Tatooine, the criminal underworld. That is basically the premise of this show, but before I give you guys my spoiler-filled thoughts on the episode, make sure to hit that like button, comment your thoughts on this episode down below, and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future Star Wars or Marvel content coverage. So right out of the gate, this episode opens in a very satisfying way as we see Boba Fett in a Bacta tank, and he's having some flashbacks to prior moments in his life. So for example, we see shots of Kamino with the Slave One. We actually get a moment where we see Boba flashing back to Attack of the Clones, the moment right where his father dies, and he picks up his dad's helmet and head on the Battle of Geonosis. That was a really cool moment where I kind of went crazy. I was like, oh my gosh, they're inserting footage from the prequels in here. But I think the coolest moment in this entire episode, and right out of the gate, is getting to see Boba escape the Sarlacc. Now, this is something that fans have been clamoring for quite some time. I myself was hoping this was the cold open to the show, and I was like, you know what? It's not a cold open, but this will do, because we get a really dope shot of him. It's all practical effects, and we see the slime, and he's literally just sitting in the Sarlacc, and he looks over and sees a stormtroopers over there, and then he ends up punching a hole through it, turning on his flamethrower, and he ends up punching his hand through the sand, escaping the Sarlacc pit. This is something that we needed to see for quite some time. I think they did it justice here, and it's easily the best moment in this entire episode for me. It was also cool to see the destruction of the sail barge surrounding the Sarlacc, because this is literally right after Return of the Jedi, and then we actually see Boba Fett just going through hell in this episode. I mean, this is all a flashback, but he is beat up and looks burnt almost just from the sun. He's just laying out there baked. We actually see his armor get stolen off of him by some Jawas, and then he later becomes captive to some Tusken Raiders, and he's basically just a prisoner for the majority of this episode. But then we cut to the present day, and Fennec kind of wakes him up from the Bacta tank, and then he goes about his daily life of being this new head figure of the criminal underworld on Tatooine. And I really like the role Boba steps in. There's also a lot of really cool callbacks to Return of the Jedi, as he mentions how this used to be Jabba's reign, and he's not going to reign the same way as Jabba. He talks about how Bib Fortuna is dead, and there's even some mentions to Gamorrean guards who were only loyal to Jabba, but they end up pledging their allegiance to Boba. So I like how there's a lot of callbacks to the Return of the Jedi film, as that is actually one of my favorite Star Wars movies, and it just is really fitting because this is immediately after Mando Season 2, and it's all in the aftermath of the original trilogy, a time period that I'm really happy they're actually exploring. So in the present day, Boba and Fennec are seeing a bunch of new people and these head figures, like people speaking on behalf of different mayors, and the council is sort of starting to form. You can tell people are trying to get on good terms with Boba Fett, and there's actually one moment in the episode where Boba and Fennec go out to Mos Espa, and we get to see them in the cantina, and I thought this was a really cool nod to that original Star Wars film, my favorite movie of all time, the original Star Wars, as we get to see a little bit of the cantina band playing, and just some familiar alien figures in this cantina. Now, I think this is just establishing some power dynamics and relationships on Tatooine, and especially the role Boba Fett plays, as not everyone's really taking him serious just yet, because he is a newbie, and he's obviously a bounty hunter with a reputation, but he's no Jabba the Hutt, so I don't think he's really instilling fear in people as much, and Boba Fett even says in this episode that he's not going to be as ruthless as Jabba was. So Boba and Fennec have this exchange where they receive a little bit of credit in their helmets, and as they're leaving this area, they get ambushed by some people who are holding some shields that honestly look like TVA portals from the show Loki in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We get some pretty cool action here as Boba ends up kicking some major ass for a second. There's one shot where he has an electric staff, and he literally has this gruesome, brutal look on his face as he's smashing down on these people. Fennec is kicking some ass as well, but Boba actually ends up taking some significant damage here, and he ends up having to get rushed back to the Bacta tank by the Gamorrean guards. Now, I find this highly interesting because it didn't look like he took any really severe wounds. It just looked like he got electrocuted a little bit, so I'm wondering if he has a hypersensitivity to some injuries, and if this is expanded upon in this show, because it seems like he always is in the Bacta tank healing. And it's worth noting that before he goes into the Bacta tank, he tells Fennec to catch the two other guards that were alive and bring them in alive. So she goes, and we get this really cool parkour action scene that, by the way, is accompanied by a wonderful score. I want to highlight the score of this show because it is damn good. It's almost like the Mandalorian score in a little bit of a different font, and I'm very fond of that. But Fennec ends up bringing one of those guards into Jabba's palace, which is what I'm going to call it. It's not Boba's palace in my head. And then we cut to Boba in the Bacta tank, and the rest of this episode is actually a flashback to Boba as a prisoner for the Tusken Raiders, and we see him talking to this Rodian, and they're chained together, and they have to dig for water, water and a lot of different things. He's basically just being treated very poorly, but he ends up fighting this monster in the sand and ends up beheading it and killing it and taking the head back to the Tusken Raiders, and he's kind of praised as a hero there. They end up giving him the water instead of making him dig for it, so that was a nice little callback. And I can kind of put the pieces together to see he gets his actual staff and attire that he's wearing in Season 2, Episode 1 of The Mandalorian. He gets his attire from these Tusken Raiders. You can very clearly tell that that's what it's setting the stage for. But the episode ended fairly abruptly, in my opinion, and I was not crazy about this because after he gets awarded this, it just kind of zooms in on Boba and the episode ends. Now, I wasn't crazy about this at all because this is the first of 7 episodes in the Book of Boba Fett, and it didn't really do anything to push the narrative forward or put any pieces of the puzzle in motion. It was literally just a flashback episode for the majority of the runtime, giving us more information on Boba Fett, but honestly, we didn't really need this because we already knew who Boba was from The Mandalorian and his past appearances in Star Wars movies, so taking time away from the present and going back to the past, putting Boba in a situation that we already know he's going to escape, didn't really do too much for me. And in a way, someone in my watch party chat actually said this feels like a bit of a prologue to the actual Boba Fett show, and I fully agree with that because nothing has really been set in place. And we actually did see quite a bit of the money shots from the trailer in this episode, so that's promising. Hopefully they have some pretty big reveals up their sleeve for later in the show. But if you really think about it, the next episode is probably just going to be the council meeting for the first time, and I'm not really sure what the main central plot of the Book of Boba Fett is yet. And when I'm comparing this premiere to the premiere of The Mandalorian, I'm a little underwhelmed and a little unsatisfied. The first episode of The Mandalorian set up the bounty hunting guild, and it put Mando on a mission where he ends up having to kill IG-11, and then he finds the target is this Yoda figure, Baby Yoda, aka Grogu, who I have right behind me. And that ending shot in first episode perfectly sets up the show, and it lets us get on board with the show from the start and understand where it's probably going to be heading. With the Book of Boba Fett, it felt more like 20 minutes of flashback to a moment in time where Boba Fett was held captive, but it really didn't matter because we knew he was going to escape, and it didn't really push anything forward in my opinion, or set up the story in a way that's really going to hook that many people in. I think Boba Fett's a really cool character. Temuera Morrison does a good job portraying him here, especially with his facial expressions when he is a captive prisoner, but a lot of this episode was just flashbacks that didn't really do anything to add to the current story or pushing the actual Boba Fett story forward, in my opinion. I thought the score was wonderful, the action is promising and is definitely going to come into play later in the show, and I do like the characters. I thought the flashbacks at the beginning were really cool, but the overbearing amount of flashbacks, especially to him as a captive prisoner, just didn't really do it for me, and it kind of made this episode feel kind of lackluster in the end. So overall, this was a fine episode of TV and an okay premiere. I expected more out of a Star Wars live-action TV show premiere. I didn't dislike this episode by any means. I thought the episode had some highlight moments, but overall, I'm not fully sold on the Book of Boba Fett yet. I hope next week really picks up the pace. But that's going to do it for my spoiler thoughts / review of the Book of Boba Fett Episode 1. Definitely drop your thoughts in the comments down below. Were you underwhelmed by this, or were you a pretty big fan of it? I know there was some divisiveness on Twitter as well as here in the chat for my watch party, so let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments down below. Make sure to hit that like button, and again, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my coverage of the Book of Boba Fett, as well as my Marvel videos, as well as all my other content. But thank you guys so much for watching. May the Force be with you, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.